Hey, my Patreon patrons voted for which previous 5 stupid things topics I should revisit, so here are 5 more stupid things about the 4th place finisher in that poll, climate change denial. It's fueled by religious arrogance. The main points of disagreement between climate change denialists and their opponents, the other 97% of scientists in the world, are scientific in nature, so it's a little jarring at first to hear how blatantly religious many of the arguments against the significance and/or existence of climate change can be. It's not at all unusual to hear a denialist politician employ arguments that describe Earth as God's creation and assume that humanity is simply incapable of damaging it in ways the facts would seem to suggest we are. It's embraced by conspiracy theorists. Speaking of disregarding inconvenient facts, it's easy to see why climate change denialism is so attractive to conspiracy theorists. After all, if global warming isn't actually happening, there must be a reason why nearly all of the world's scientists want to convince us that it is. And some of these theories are relatively straightforward, like the scientists are perpetuating this hoax in order to secure more funding for themselves. But then that leaves you wondering how they've been able to so thoroughly convince everybody else, which means that it can't possibly be that simple. The United Nations, the European Union, and pretty much everybody else who professes to believe that global warming is actually happening have got to be in on the conspiracy as well. I bet this thing goes all the way to the top. No, higher than that. No, the top, I says. How else did he win an Oscar? It's promoted by opponents of renewable energy. Here's the funny thing about this one. It kind of is a conspiracy. At least, it's the closest thing to one that I know of related to this subject. And the conspirators aren't scientists or environmentalists who are trying to convince us that global warming is happening, but rather those who are trying to convince us that it isn't happening because they feel that their interests are threatened by the prospect of measures like caps and additional taxes on carbon emissions, which are designed to quicken the transition from fossil fuels, which are largely responsible for anthropogenic global warming, to cleaner, more renewable sources of energy. According to a study published last year, organizations opposed to efforts to address climate change received an estimated $7 billion in funding in the years 2003 to 2010, and most of that came from anonymous donors. But never mind that, it's the scientists we should be really suspicious of, right? I'm watching you, Julius. It has a bottomless bag of excuses. Since climate change denialism isn't based on empirical evidence to start with, it's essentially impenetrable. And even if you do somehow get a denier to admit that climate change is real, is significant, and is due to human activity, they always have a retreat position that will allow them to continue to oppose any efforts to do something about it. Hey, what do we know? Maybe climate change is a good thing. Or maybe these efforts to do something about it will be so expensive that they'll hobble developing economies, so we should just wait a while before we do something. Or, you know what, maybe we've already waited too long to do something and it's too late now, so we should just stop arguing about this. Not all denialists are the same, but they all have this one thing in common: an endless list of reasons to do nothing. It's treated with more respect than it deserves. Climate change denialism is to climate science as creationism is to evolutionary biology. It has zero credibility, it is rejected by the overwhelming majority of scientists worldwide, and its supporters, though loud and well-funded, are relatively few in number. And yet still, all too often, it is treated as an equally valid position opposite the scientific consensus, as though the occurrence of anthropogenic global warming was not settled as a scientific question years ago. I'm not a scientist, but almost everybody who is a scientist says that the question should no longer be, is climate change happening, or are we responsible for it, but what should we do about it? And the answer to that question, broadly stated, is fucking something. The hardest part is only picking 5. Catch you next time.